This is Criteria. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast. My name is James Majewski, and I'm here joined by my co-host, Thomas V. Miras. Hey, Thomas. How's it going?
Hey, James.
We are not together in the studio today. We are recording remotely. I think this will be one of two upcoming episodes that are going to have to be recorded remotely as we sort of juggle summer plans. You've got some exciting plans coming up, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go to Italy in mid-July.
That's awesome.
About 10 days.
That's
yeah.
a sizable trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're going to California.
Right. We're doing the extended family tour for our new son. So first we're going to go down to Virginia to visit with my family there, and then we're going to fly out to California to visit with my wife's family. So yeah, we're like T-minus like 2 or 3 days before we get out of the city, and we're going to spend some time actually at Lake Tahoe, which is a cool segue into the film that we're talking about, because portions of this film take place at Lake Tahoe. The film primarily takes place in California. Of course, I'm talking about Out of the Past, the seminal noir film directed by Jacques Tourneur and starring Robert Mitchum and Jane Greer.
And
it's based off of
Kirk Douglas.
Oh yeah, that's right. Kirk Douglas. This is, I think, like his second film role or something. It's like early in his career.
Yeah, I love him.
For both of them, for Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas, I think that this was the first noir film that Robert Mitchum did.
Oh, that's cool.
So it kind of like established this persona that he would inhabit for the rest of his career, basically. We really loved him in Night of the Hunter,
right? Which
we
we'll
haven't
talk about
discussed
eventually, I think.
Yeah, we'll talk about it eventually, but a lot of similar characteristics in the character that he plays in that film. What else can I say? It's based off of a 1946 novel, Build My Gallows High, as many of these noir films were.
Right.
Noir was kind of like before it was a film genre, it was kind of like a pulp detective
it was called hard-boiled
yes.
fiction. Yeah, like a style of crime fiction.
Right.
Raymond Chandler, James M. Cain, people like that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Build My Gallows High was written by Daniel Mainwaring using the pseudonym Jeffrey Holmes, and he also did the screenplay for this film.
And this film is 1947.
Yes,
yeah.
I didn't.
So this is pretty early in the noir
mm-hmm.
Phenomenon, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that this and Double Indemnity, and then maybe like Maltese Falcon or something, are kind of like held up as some
of the foundational.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say, I think I just watched Double Indemnity for the first time because we were considering doing that to introduce our discussion of noir, which is the reason we're doing this film, is to sort of start talking about this genre. And that maybe is even more of a quintessential noir, but I felt like that this film was more morally appealing than that one. So that's one of the main reasons I decided to do this one instead.
Yeah, I think that if you asked like film scholars, you would probably get a mixed. I think you would get just as many people citing Out of the Past as you would Double Indemnity, maybe.
Yeah, I think that Double Indemnity is probably, even the visual style might even be more like quintessentially noir.
It's so why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about what constitutes the visual style of film noir?
Sure. Yeah. Well, noir is really so much about style, to the point where it's been debated apparently whether it's even really a genre. Because, for example, noir, there are settings that we associate with it, but there's really a wide range of settings in noir. Noir can be set anywhere. It doesn't have to be in an urban setting, for instance. It doesn't have to be any particular. People think it's always about a private eye, but that's actually like a small percentage of noir films are actually about a private eye, for instance. So it's really more of like an ethos and a style than it is a genre, in the strict sense of like a Western, for example, being a genre where the subject matter is really consistent.
Right.
So So Noir, you mentioned the visual style. It seems to have derived from aspects of German expressionism in film, which we discussed when we talked about the film Metropolis. And the specific aspect that really it stuck with, which I think was taken from very influenced by directors like Fritz Lang with his film M, would be this use of like chiaroscuro lighting. And this is just one of many elements of noir that, was adopted into the wider language of cinema,
Right.
And so the technical term would be low key lighting. So I guess high key lighting is when you use you're using like a key light, a fill light, and something else. There's like 3 different lights that you're lighting a character with, but a low key lighting is you're just using like one light source and you're leaving a lot of shadow. Perhaps part of the character's face is in shadow or his surroundings are. So that's kind of the main like visual hallmark of noir. And this film, there's some of that. I wouldn't say that this film is as intensively visually noir as some others.
Dude, I totally think that this is very visually noir.
Yeah.
And I think that chiaroscuro is very, very on display in this film. Now, I haven't, it's been a while since I've watched Double Indemnity, so I can't compare the two, offhand by memory. But watching this, there's a ton of use of, high key versus low key lighting. So like, let me give a quick synopsis of the film before we dive into talking about the visual style here. The film centers around Robert Mitchum's character, Jeff Bailey, whose real name is Jeff Markham, right?
Yeah.
And he's at the beginning of the film, we find him as this, he's running his own gasoline stop, and this shadowy figure emerges out of his past to kind of pull him back into this past life where he was a detective, living in New York, kind of associating with shady characters. And a large part of the film is devoted to a flashback that he has with his present love interest. I think her name is Anne Miller or something. Yeah. She kind of represents the possibility of redemption for him now in the present moment when he's turning his life around. But he tells her this flashback. This is very characteristic of noir, the
voiceover narration and flashback.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So probably about, a third, half, maybe a little less than half of the film is this flashback of him talking about his associations with this gangster type guy. I guess he's a gambler, played by Kirk Douglas.
Yeah, his name is Whit.
Yeah. So his association with Whit, who hires him to track down his girlfriend, played by Jane Greer, Kathy Moffat. Is that her name?
Something like that.
Yeah. So Kathy has
Moffat.
shot
Moffat.
Yeah, has shot him and made off with $40,000.
Yeah.
She's kind of the quintessential femme fatale, which is also very characteristic of film noir. And so Robert Mitchum goes after her and ends up being seduced by her, falling in love with her, running away with her, and that's basically where that brings us back to the present day. That she and him have a falling out. There's much ado, and now he's away from her, kind of trying to get over her, get away from his past life, and now it's all coming back in.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get into more of the plot later on, but I wanted to bring that up right off the bat, sort of, what this film deals with, this present life that Jeff Bailey is living versus the shadowy past life of Jeff Markham. Because that's expressed in the lighting. When we first see the town of Bridgeport, this little sort of rural town in California, way outside of Los Angeles or San Francisco, and it's all, really well lit. It's
Right.
all daytime. It's very sort of what's the word, bucolic, like American down home feel, kind of like 1950s optimism, which is really contrasted by this seedy world of gangsters and beautiful women and running afoul of the law, where a lot of that takes place at night,
Right.
very darkly lit, a lot of this low key lighting.
Noir typically, a lot of it's one of the odd things about noir is that, so much of it takes place in California, which is, a bright, sunny place, but it's all the more high contrast with the seedy night underbelly, and so much of it takes place at the dark and the rain,
Totally. And that's ultimately where the name comes from. I think, it's referring
French
to
for black. Yeah.
Yeah, it's referring to the tone of sort of doom and gloom and despair and darkness, but it's also referring quite literally to the visual style.
Yeah.
These are very visually dark films a lot of the time, and that's definitely the case here. I like, you don't see so much of, say, like German expressionism, but
in terms of set design and stuff.
But when it comes to the lighting in chiaroscuro, I think there are lots of instances where you get, whether it's like interior spaces where there are really long shadows being cast.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this like ominous feel to these interior scenes, or, moments where visual information is obscured. Like when they're in the cabin later, this is what ultimately sends Robert Mitchum's character and Kathy Jane Greer's character apart, is their past catches up with them, and she ends up killing his old partner.
Right. Because he's been trailing them and is going to turn them in or something.
But in that scene, there's some really great moments of like when the partner is trying to blackmail Robert Mitchum and say, pay me off. His face is illuminated, but Robert Mitchum's face is totally dark.
Yeah.
It's being blocked, in fact, by this character who's standing between him and the fireplace, where it's really just being lit from this fire. So that's like just one smart use of lighting. Again, after she shoots him, the camera cuts and we see the pistol, and her hand slowly goes down into the shadows, and then the gun is gone, like just as quickly as it appeared.
Right. So you're right. The film does use these techniques. It might not be as constant because there's more outdoor film, more sort of outdoor scenes, or you know, full daylight scenes than you might see in some noirs. But,
I think that those scenes are functioning too, sort of within this visual vocabulary, because I think that the choice of Lake Tahoe as a setting is significant because it's so beautiful. Now, I've never been there myself. I'm excited to go there in a couple weeks. But in this film, the shots that we get are just like these beautiful mountains and lakes and trees, and it really contrasts with the tight claustrophobic spaces of, like these jazz nightclubs, or these, car
offices.
interiors. Yeah, right.
Offices at night.
Yeah, night. It's a nightclub office that he goes to break into later on. That's another great shot where the camera, he leaves the office after getting the documents that he needs, and the camera tracks him down the hallway, and then he approaches the stairs, and you see two men emerging out of the shadows. They're totally just dark figures. Yeah. There's just like a lot of tension where the shot is completely from behind. Mm-hmm. It's like over Mitchum's shoulder. So yeah, I think that for our listeners who haven't seen this film, it might be hard to visualize what it is that we're describing, but But if you've seen this film, or definitely if you go and watch this film after listening to this, I think it'll be really easy to identify these moments where the cinematographer and the director are just really cleverly utilizing light and negative space, darkness. Another way that this is very visually noir is with the cigarettes. There's a lot of cigarette acting in this film, and the cigarettes are like very deliberately lit to accentuate the smoke. So you get just like these big puffs of smoke, or this like trail of smoke coming from a cigarette that just really adds like a lot of atmosphere and mood to a scene.
I actually wrote down a number of instances of like interesting cigarette action in this film. So like,
oh, cool.
So for example, Joe, who's the guy from his past who comes to find him in this small town. Joe, I really enjoyed Joe. He's played by Paul Valentine. He's just a great character because he's the thug. He's the henchman of Wit. Whereas, what's our protagonist's name?
Markham,
Jeff. Yeah, Jeff is smarter, and he's the honest hired man who turns dishonest because he falls in love with this girl. But Joe also has an interesting energy where he's sort of soft spoken, even though he is like the violent thug,
right?
And sort of smooth in his own way.
But
so he gets the first character that Joe interacts with in the film is this deaf and dumb kid who works for Jeff at this gas station. And he gets his attention after trying to talk to him multiple times. He gets his attention by throwing a cigarette at him. And then, there's more cigarette action in that same scene, but but
that's like that's a nice moment to look at, because it's really like the first instance of like violence,
right?
Or like the threat of violence. Right. You know what I mean? Like this character, when he arrives, he's all in black. He's in this black trench coat with the black fedora.
Right.
He's asking questions. There's already a sense of unease, but when he throws that cigarette at him to get his attention, it's like, whoa, okay, maybe there's like a threat that's like beneath the surface of this interaction. And that's, I think, characteristic too of a lot of noir in general, but also a lot of the conflict in this film in particular is sort of like the sort of threat of violence that's bubbling beneath the surface,
Yeah. So we get a lot of different things. So another of the ones that struck me was there's a scene where Jeff has been using this cab driver in San Francisco it's in San Francisco, right? Or is it LA that they're...
no, they're in they do go to LA at one point, right. But most of it takes place in San Francisco.
So they're in San Francisco, and he's asking this cab driver to take him around and trail people and wait for him in different places. And at a certain point, there's a discovery of a dead body where he realizes they're trying to frame him, and he hides it, and he leaves the apartment, gets into the cab, and he just wordlessly takes the cigarette out of the cab driver's mouth and starts smoking it. And nobody acts like it's weird.
Yeah.
They just kind of accept it.
Well, I think he gives it back to him, and then he says, "You keep it," or something that, And so there is like a cool, go ahead.
There's the one where you mentioned the scene where he breaks into a nightclub office. There's a guy there. He's trying to get these documents from him, and he punches him out. And then after he gets these documents, he takes the time to find and light a cigarette in the office and then flees the scene. Cool. There's another scene where they're in a different office. There's a confrontation, and he leaves his cigarette burning on the office floor, and then cuts to or pans to Joe stomping it out. And then there's another one where he comes back after Joe is killed. Late in the movie, he comes back and stands over Kathy's bed in the dark, and she's woken up by the sound of him lighting his cigarette. So those are just a number of...
That's such a beautiful shot, right? I mean, like, that's the other thing about this film is that it doesn't smack you over the head with its visual style a lot of the time, but really, if you look at it, like, almost every scene is really almost every shot is really thoughtfully composed. Not just in terms of lighting, but in terms of, arrangement of, subjects in the frame. And it's really beautiful. I think I remember hearing somewhere that this was sort of a consequence of a lot of foreign directors immigrating to the United States and sort of like, getting into the Hollywood system and working on these low budget crime films because there was more, I guess maybe there was more access, but also there was more like artistic license to more artistic freedom to be had on these like lower budget films that were just sort of like, they're just crime films, like they've got their niche audience and they don't have to be appealing to a mainstream.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think that that this is a very, very representative film when it comes to the visuals of film noir. I wanted to read a quote that I came across by Roger Ebert about the film, referring to the cigarettes.
Sure.
He says that the cigarette smoke expresses their moods, their personalities, and their energy levels. There were guns in Out of the Past, but the real hostility came when Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas smoked at each other.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty cool.
That was great.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the other aspects of noir that we'll find in this film. Sure. This is a genre that really explodes like immediately after World War II. It becomes like ubiquitous for a couple of years, especially in like 46, 47. And it's just, we can try to figure out, I guess, why in this very optimistic time in American history, this film genre, exploring the seedy and cynical side of American life became so popular. So this is not a scientific, exposition of what noir is by any means, but I'm just going to, mention some characteristics aside from the visual style, which we already talked about. So, the hero is not always a private eye. Sometimes he's a guy who gets framed for a crime. Sometimes he got a guy who commits a crime and is on the run. But he's usually a very cynical character in a way. But sometimes in certain cases, he's also very principled. He has his own sort of code that he lives by. This is especially the case in situations where the hero is a private eye. I think it's the case certainly in the Maltese Falcon. But he's always operating in a corrupt world, and whatever corruption he may have is always like out corrupted by the people around him, and particularly by the femme fatale. So the hero is often this sort of cunning, cynical, worldly wise guy, but he is made into a sap inevitably by a woman, and often used as a fall guy for a crime, as they try to do pin a crime on Jeff in this film. And then sometimes there's also like a good girl as a counterbalance to the femme fatale, as you see in this film with Ann Miller. And so those are some of the types of characters you often get. There's often like an element of double crossing or betrayal, and sometimes the plot is this sort of like convoluted sequence of double crossings. There's often like because it has its roots in crime fiction, it's not necessarily a mystery genre, but there are often plot, sort of elements taken from mystery fiction. You mentioned voiceover. There's sort of like a sadistic or like perverse eroticism, I would say, to noir. Just in the dynamic between this especially comes out in in Double Indemnity, where they're plotting a murder together. This guy is having an affair with this woman, and they're plotting to murder the woman's husband, and that violent energy kind of melds into the sexual energy of the plot. Less so, well, there's some of that in this film, but I think that in this case, it's less plotting together and more plotting against each other. But I think my favorite aspect of Noir, plot wise, is something that you see very often, which is that this hero who is flawed and cynical and sometimes principled or sometimes a kind of a scumbag, nevertheless often makes some kind of decision of integrity very late in the film,
right,
kind of too late, and often at a great cost to himself. Yeah. And in an interesting way, because there's still this kind of like bitterness and self-loathing usually. I mean, I can think of a number of examples where this happened. So it's not quite redemption. It sort of points to redemption, but the hero is still kind of considering himself to be a fool or a scumbag, and we see that very much in this film, where he's being told by multiple people, you don't deserve this, good woman, so that sort of goes together with the hero being the fall guy. He kind of goes out on his own terms often, but he's still, if he's not killed, then he is, he loses something, or he's left alone in this like bitter state, or whatever it happens to be. And I find that to be a very fascinating, for some reason it makes me think of like the Norse ethos of like fighting evil with no hope of victory or something. But
one of the things that it makes me think of is just Greek tragedy.
Right.
Like there's a certain like fatalism to Noir. I think it feels almost like, the fates have it out for this guy, and it's like you can't escape. Like in this film, you get the sense of, like a classic Greek tragic hero trying to escape his destiny, but he can't, know, and that he ultimately sort of like resigns himself to that, but in this way that still sort of stands athwart fate.
Yes, that's right.
It's not like a despairing. It's just sort of like I can't escape this, but I can sort of rage against it or something like that. I don't know.
And very often the decision has to do with going against the woman who was manipulating him. That's certainly the case in The Maltese Falcon. It's the case in Sunset Boulevard. Often you at least get to have the pleasure of seeing the femme fatale put in her place.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's one thing I would add to this, to what you already mentioned about the femme fatale is like, I think that one thing that characterizes these relationships, male and female relationships in noir films, is a power struggle. That like oftentimes there is distrust. Oftentimes there is double crossing.
Well, it's like a mirror image of screwball comedy.
That's interesting,
because people have often say the screwball comedy has, often the woman kind of has the upper hand in the sort of back and forth and battle of wits.
Right. And it's like a lot of times the noir hero, as in this film, he's made to be a chump, because he gets seduced, that he becomes obsessed with the femme fatale.
Yes, obsession is a good word to use, because noir often has this obsessive quality as well. There's actually a Catholic book written on noir that I ordered and unfortunately did not come in time for us to do this. So I'm glad we'll be doing some more discussions of noir in the future, so that I can maybe refer to it. Thomas Hibbs, who is a Thomistic philosopher and recently did a stint as the president of the University of Dallas, but it's now back at Baylor University, where he was before. He wrote a book called Arts of Darkness on noir, and it's out of print, but I ordered a copy and it just seems to have gotten lost in shipping, but hopefully I'll be able to get a copy before our next noir discussion. But it's worth noting that, that this book is out there for people who are interested.
That's cool.
And, another, I wanted to read this little thing from Wikipedia about noir, because I thought it was just amusing. It's citing a couple of like film scholars. According to David Slocum, protagonists assume the literal identities of dead men in nearly 15% of all noir. Amnesia is fairly epidemic. Noir's version of the common cold, in the words of film historian Lee Server. So that neither of those happen in this film, but I just thought that was really amusing. That was like those are like such common plot. Points.
Yeah. Well, amnesia doesn't really happen, but it's almost like there's still this theme of memory and of forgetting. Like at the beginning when Anne asks him, "Have you ever been married?" He says, "Not that I can remember." And it's like it's this deliberately vague reply because he doesn't want to talk about his past. He doesn't really want to summon or remember his past. And
if not amnesia, a lot of them have this kind of vertigo, to use the title of another noir related film, at like discovering betrayal, or at somebody who was supposed to be dead coming back in the story. Sometimes it'll be the hero himself who's supposed to have been dead, and then he comes back, and the villains are shocked.
Well, so another thing that you mentioned, characteristic of noir, is this like tendency for the plot lines to be kind of convoluted.
Right.
And that definitely happens here. I think that for a lot of noir films, you have to watch them like 2 or 3 times before you have like a confident sense of what exactly is going on with the plot and the double crossing and the schemes and all of this. But that isn't to say that you need to watch a noir film more than once to enjoy it and really get what's going on. And that's because I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but I think that the plot details, at least when it gets down to like the scheming and the criminal enterprises, are really secondary to the relationships and the characterizations. In this film, the first time I watched it, I got like totally lost. Maybe like 2/3 of the way into the film, after the second or third double cross, you're just sort of like, wait, what? And I think that probably even there are many noir films where the plot doesn't really even make that much sense. Like, things happen that are just sort of, you kind of just have to take it at face value. But it really becomes like a vehicle for, the deeper concerns, like the things that we're really, really interested in and invested in. In this case, it's the relationship between Jeff Markham and Kathy. In that scene when he breaks into Mita's house in San Francisco, and he's looking for the tax documents that he was originally sent to find, and Kathy shows up, and he overhears her on the phone that she's involved in this attempt to frame him, and then that confrontation. It's like, okay, I might not know exactly why she's doing this, like why she's betraying him, or how she's betraying him, or what angle she's playing, or even what really angle he's playing. But like, my question is really about this relationship, because she immediately sets to work on basically seducing him again, or, really appealing to the love that they shared. The scene is awesome because, again, we're sort of seeing it over his shoulder. His face is almost completely obscured, and it's really her face that's in the center of the frame and is illuminated from behind. It's beautiful, but it's like we just get this close up of her working him over, basically using her charm. And the question on our mind isn't like, okay, what's going on with this plot? Like, what is she doing? It's like, well, can she be trusted? Does she love him? And what's he gonna do?
Yeah.
So like that's why I'm not like super beat up about how good or poor of a job we're doing at explaining at giving a synopsis of the plot of this film, because it is really convoluted and it's I would get lost.
I would resist this idea a little bit because I think that noir is something that comes out of genre fiction, and genre one of the reasons genre is often taken less seriously by, the highfalutin academics is precisely because it is concerned with the details. And not just the idea or like the theme. So in a fantasy, novel, that the lore is part of the pleasure, even if not all the details might matter in the sense of like a theme that can be abstracted. And similarly in a mystery novel, part of the pleasure of it is this well-oiled machine, so it's true that sometimes, the effect or the like aesthetic effect is more important to the author than all of the details and everything fitting together perfectly. But I do think that a lot of the pleasure that people who are really into one genre or another derive from it is the aesthetic pleasure of seeing how everything fits together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's one more aspect of noir that I wanted to bring up, and it is one of the chief pleasures of noir, which is this hard-boiled language, this dialogue style, which has been parodied a million times. And part of the cool thing about the hard-boiled style is that it is cool even in parody, But yeah, so just I actually I'm going to play a clip from the film here, which is the first bit of this film I ever saw, because before I saw the whole movie, a friend of mine played me just this scene on YouTube, and so I'm gonna play for people the clip after the initial flashback section of the film. Jeff and Kathy first meet again, and it turns out that she has gone back to Whit and told him much of what passed between them.
Jeff, I had to come back. What else could I do?
You can never help anything, can you? You're like a leaf that the wind blows from one gutter to another. You can't help anything you do. Even murder.
You can't say it was that.
I can say one thing. I buried him. What did you tell him?
Well,
About us? But you couldn't help it, could you, Kathy?
he knew it, Jeff. He looked right into me and he knew it.
How much?
What, Jeff?
I mean about Fisher. Did he look into you for that, too?
No, I didn't tell that.
Don't lie to me.
I didn't. I wouldn't tell him that. I wouldn't tell anyone that. I swear it, Jeff. Believe me.
Sure, I believe you.
I didn't know what to do. I was always afraid of him and afraid of what I'd done. I couldn't live that way anymore. I couldn't stand it. Oh, Jeff, I've missed you. I've wondered about you and prayed you'd understand. Can you understand?
You prayed, Kathy?
Can't you even feel sorry for me?
I'm not going to try.
Jeff.
Look, just get out, will you? I have to sleep in this room. Let's just leave it where it all is. Get out.
Yeah, that scene's awesome.
My favorite parts are, you prayed, Kathy, and and I have to sleep in this room.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Great.
Another great line is, you're like a leaf that the wind blows from one gutter to another.
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote down
yeah.
a few great exchanges when our first scene between Whit and Jeff. Jeff is just this private detective who's been hired by Whit to track this girl down. And, he goes, Whit says, "You just sit and stay inside yourself. You wait for me to talk. I like that." Jeff says, "I never found out much listening to myself." Later, Kathy and Jeff are in a casino in Mexico. She says, "Is there a way to win?" He says, "There's a way to lose more slowly." There's a scene where their first sort of their romance is blossoming, and she's claiming that she never stole this money from Whit, and she says, "Won't you believe me?" He says, "Baby, I don't care." And then he kisses her. And then another bit in the narration, "How big a chump can you get to be?" I was finding out.
Yeah. Another good line is that scene I was talking about before when he finds out that Kathy's involved in this plot to frame him, and she says, "You should have killed me for what I did just now." And he says, "There's time."
Yeah. Hey, look at the lighting on my face. Got some
You got some
chiaroscuro.
noir.
The sun just got really bright from one side.
Yeah. So the dialogue in this film is awesome. In Noir, it's like you get a lot of these really great one-liners.
Yeah.
I think that this film does a good job of sort of introducing you into that world by giving us that first scene in the cafe with the like state trooper and the sort of Gabby hostess, and there's like this back and forth banter that
Right.
I think you would find very believable if you were in this sort of like local cafe with people who see each other day in and day out. But then, of course, it bleeds out into the whole world speaks this way, you know? But by then, I think you've already sort of like bought into it and just accepted that this is how we talk here. But there's like lines that, you know, you couldn't get away with in real life, you know, like descriptions of things like that people would never say. But you know what's interesting actually about the scene that we just watched is that I think that there's actually something about it that's both representative and also non-representative of Noir. And that's that the character of Kathy, she's being very like non-femme fatale in this scene. She's being very like sort of pleading and big on emotion and kind of like the dame in distress.
Yeah, but
like
I should have mentioned that is that usually the femme fatale presents as a dame in distress.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess that's what I'm getting at is that like this is sort of this moment is a contrast to other times when we've seen her, where she's just like dead, like stoic and cool and like, you know, like with looks that could kill.
Well, one of the more chilling moments is when they're deciding to go away together, when she's basically blackmailing him into going off with her at the end of the movie, and then she's been packing and stuff, and she comes back down, and what does she say? Something like, you know, I think we deserve a break. What's the line? Do you know what I'm talking about?
We've been wrong and unlucky for a long time.
I think we deserve a break. Which is like, I feel like that's such a good portrayal of how like evil or like selfish people think, you know, which is that like they've just had all this drama, all of this like, you know, she's just blackmailed him and all this evil wheeling and dealing. And then she's just, you know, acting like it all doesn't matter, acting like it didn't happen.
His response is awesome because he says, "We deserve each other," and takes the shot and throws the glass into the fireplace, you know?
Yeah.
And that's like a signal to us in this final moment that maybe he's not totally, you know, on board. We've seen him get totally on board with her in the past, but here it's like, I don't know. But
it's interesting that the femme fatale always seems to be like way more an object of our contempt and condemnation than the male villain in these movies, you know? Like Wit, we don't really have that much against Wit at the end of the day.
I mean, but it's not, but he's not portrayed in a sympathetic light.
No, I know,
really,
but it's just that you get way more angry with the femme fatale.
Well, but that's because, you know, the femme fatale is often given much more of a sympathetic light, you know?
Right.
I think that in this film, there's a lot that's given to this character, Kathy, to sort of humanize her so that she's not just like a pure, like stone cold, perverse, you know, villain. But that we really get a sense, I think that she does love him, you know, even though it's like a really broken and really like flawed and selfish love, that she does want to she's using him and manipulating him, but it's like she's not discarding him, you know, like she could have killed him at the end and she doesn't. We get moments where she's like softened. In their first romance in Acapulco, he says something like, you know, and there she came like a girl just let out of school, you know, and she's like smiling and she's shoeless, and it's like there's this this soft touch that's given to her characterization in this film, and I think that like makes us more, you know, like aghast when she double crosses our hero, you know, and betrays him. And whereas Wit, man, Kirk Douglas is awesome in this film. Can we just talk about his performance a little bit? I feel like
I'm a huge fan of him, honestly. I went through a big Kirk Douglas phase a while back. I was just watching a bunch of his stuff.
Yeah, it's so cool how both he and Robert Mitchum sort of encapsulate this like masculine cool that is like so much a part of these noir archetypes. But there's like a difference in them that really makes for great chemistry on screen, where Robert Mitchum is kind of like, he's more laid back, he's more sort of like withdrawn. Kirk Douglas is like smooth and charismatic, and then like really sharp at moments. There are like moments where his eyes like shoot daggers. Like when Robert Mitchum is first taking the job to go track down Kathy, he says something like, you know, and what happens to the girl when I bring her back? And we see Kirk Douglas just like almost looking straight into the camera, and he says, I won't touch her. You know, but like I can't even say it the way that he says it. He says it like with such hatred. You know, it's like he's promising not to like, you know, hurt her, but like you don't really buy it. But then also like when he tracks him down in Acapulco, you know, surprises him there, and there's all this tension. We're like, oh no, is he gonna find out that he's there with Kathy? You know, Kirk Douglas plays that like suspicion so well. Yeah. And that threat of like at any moment he's gonna find out and it's gonna be bad, you know? So
that's why it's cool. That's why I also appreciate Paul Valentine, who plays Joe, because he also does not overplay like the thug thing.
Right. Well, and this is something that's characteristic of noir that we haven't talked about yet, is in the performances. I think that there tends to be a sort of understated quality to the performances. You don't get a lot of moments of like high emotion and like, you know, explosions, crying or shouting or anything.
The most high emotion you get is usually when the femme fatale has been exposed as a double crosser, and the hero has her in his mercy, and she's now turning on the waterworks, you know?
Right. And that's why I wanted to mention that with this scene, is that you see Kathy here pleading with him, and actually it's quite uncharacteristic of how she really is, you know, in especially in other critical parts of the film. But of course, really well on display in the scene that we showed is Robert Mitchum just doing that like cynical, laconic, understated, you know, noir performance. That's, I think, you know, I think it's probably where you get, I think you can probably trace that to like this sort of modern acting style that you see a lot in like indie films or art films, which is like, it's almost like people aren't acting.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about that on the show before.
But in his cool demeanor, it also somehow shows like the underlying hurt.
Totally,
you know?
Totally. I want to contrast the things that I'm talking about, because like they're acting here, and it's like a masterclass, but it's so contained and so still. You know, this was actually one of the first things when I went to school to study acting. one of the first things that we looked at in my studio class was noir, and it was specifically because our instructor at the time wanted us to like learn this lesson about the power of stillness. That so often actors think that they have to do a lot or show a lot, and that's where the work is. But you look at a lot of these confrontations that happen in noir, and it can be just like, it can be like people don't move, you know? They're sitting at a table and like maybe the only movement is the drag of a cigarette, but like otherwise they're just sort of still locked in with each other and just delivering the lines. But it's like just boom, broadsides, happening in like naval warfare. So there's real power behind the lines. There's real power in the stillness.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, which is totally the opposite of what you get in a lot of like modern indie films, where it's like not acting becomes the cool acting. But it's, I think, really just like hiding.
What was your first introduction to noir, or if not a noir film, then like the noir style or like the hard-boiled way of talking?
Yeah. Well,
because I think a lot of people have encountered this even if they've never seen a noir film.
I think it was probably, one movie that comes to mind is Blade Runner.
Oh, okay.
Probably Blade Runner was maybe my first encounter with not just the hard-boiled persona, but and way of speaking, but like the whole. I think Blade Runner is like a real neo-noir.
Right.
It's obviously it's like super dark and femme fatale and like all this stuff, but I'm trying to think of other examples. I mean, the first noir film that I remember seeing is Maltese Falcon.
Okay.
And Humphrey Bogart is probably next to Robert Mitchum. Humphrey Bogart is probably the most recognizable and acclaimed noir hero.
Right.
And go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say that it really kind of just shows you like how far we've come in terms of our like our Hollywood actors. Like Humphrey Bogart, man, just such a like masculine man, and energy and way and look,
right.
And it's like, that's not at all like what we get with our Hollywood celebrities nowadays.
Right. Well, my introduction to noir was in Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know if you ever read much Calvin and Hobbes.
A little bit,
my favorite comic strip since childhood, but Bill Watterson, the author, would often, when he wanted to switch up the art style, he would have Calvin go into some kind of fantasy, whether it was, sci-fi or dinosaurs, or, there were a couple of instances where he would go into this noir hard-boiled style with the light and the shadows and Calvin doing the narration of his own situation, and his neighbor girl Susie would be the femme fatale. So I remember being really struck by that style of narration before I even knew what it was referring to, But I think the first noir that I saw that I was aware of as a noir was Brick, which you showed me when we were in high school.
Right.
That's how long we've known each other. We watched Brick, which is Rian Johnson's first movie, and it's a neo-noir set in a California high school. With the young Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That's like his first big role.
That was actually shot in like the suburb where I lived when I was in California.
Oh, nice.
Just outside of LA.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Another thing that comes to mind is Indiana Jones. I feel like it has certain elements of noir in it, especially like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Really?
So I remember watching that as a kid, and I think probably that was like an introduction to like some of these elements.
Yeah. Well, whether it's a noir or not, I don't know if it's a noir, but like I was saying, elements of noir style have just filtered into movies in general.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a hugely influential genre.
Yeah, and that brings me to the fact that there's no noirs on the Vatican film list, which we've been discussing on this podcast.
Yes,
and
right.
That's one reason I wanted to make a point of discussing noir and screwball comedy as two classical Hollywood genres.
Yeah, it's such an odd thing to omit, because
you think it's like moral, ambiguity, or
maybe so,
seediness that
maybe so, because this was hugely influential on French cinema.
Yes,
that's why it's named by them, basically.
Right.
Like, these films came out in the United States, and my understanding is that they were popular, but they didn't really have much. They weren't like very highly regarded.
Right.
There weren't a ton of them winning like Academy Awards.
These
or
French
anything.
critics were discussing it,
and they were the ones who identified this sort of category and named it. But then also, so it becomes very influential on French cinema, on French New Wave, but then also on Italian cinema. So I think that, and both of those, like Italian neorealism and French New Wave, are like represented on the Vatican film list. I mean, I don't know if New Wave exactly. Yeah, I guess it is. But yeah, it's weird that they wouldn't also have included at least one film from like this like that started it all, because also I think that the performance style bleeds into. I think it's probably where we get modern acting sensibility today. It like comes by way of film noir, and then into maybe like Italian neorealism, and then like out into whatever, like modern cinema. I'm no film historian, but like it just seems to me like that's got to be the lineage.
Well, so do you have any suspicions about what's going on with? I mean, gangster films were really popular, crime films were really popular in like the 30s, and people were concerned about that on a moral level. But then noir becomes huge immediately in the post-war era, which is this American boom, and this era of supposedly squeaky clean American life. And so what do you think's going on with the proliferation of this genre, where people are looking at so fascinated by how the underworld lives?
Yeah,
the losers, and so much of it is about the loser of society. The noir is this loser. The noir hero is a loser. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's really cool, but he's a loser.
Right. Right.
He starts as a loser, and he ends as a loser.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I've one theory I've heard is that this is sort of speaking to the new relationship between men and women that like war veterans were stepping into after having been away and returning to women who had basically become a working class, had gone into the workforce, and like big social changes had happened when all the men were gone, and women had to step up and take on these traditionally masculine roles, and that having to sort of try to return to that, I guess, like a lot of women lost their jobs, and a lot of women went back into, just like fulfilling the traditional motherly role in the house. The femme fatale kind of emerges as like a like in opposition to that.
Yeah.
Like in Out of the Past.
She's a woman who has to fend for herself, even though she does it by manipulating men so much of the time.
Yeah. And she escapes a man, right, who's trying to like control her, and like I think it's like a proto-feminist thing, but it's still from the perspective of like you know, like I think it's like I think I don't know how to put it. I think it probably has to do with that. I think that a loss of trust between men and women, and a predominance of, like power dynamics becoming like the hermeneutic of relational exchange. I don't know how to put that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems to me like this film is about gangsters. It is about the underworld, but it's really about this woman from his past. It's really about this relationship that he has with this woman. It's really about the impossibility of a relationship with this woman and how they doom each other.
Yeah.
And so I think that if we watched Double Indemnity, it would be the same thing.
Right.
It's
they're kind of dragging each other down.
Yeah.
And even if the hero is often making a decision of integrity or a morally correct choice in the end, he's often like, I'm going down and I'm going to take you down with me, to the woman who's betrayed him. Even if sometimes it's in a righteous way, not so much in Double Indemnity where he kills the woman. And it's just straight up murder.
Yeah. So I think that this is probably speaking to like the seams that are coming apart in the family, in male-female relationships. I like these films are very erotic too, like not in the sense that we would think, who are like so saturated with pornography, but there's like a sexual magnetism that pervades the male-female interactions, even with like sort of accidental characters. So like in this film, Mita shows up later on, and she doesn't play a super important role, but even she, right, there's like a kind of sexual magnetism that arises between Robert Mitchum's character and her. There's a distrust,
but there's just there's like I was saying before, these elements of violence in the sexuality, which is
right.
Like,
I mean, he grabs her by the shoulder. He says, something like I'm going to make it out of this in one piece or something, and she says, what does she say? She says, you always go around leaving your fingerprints on a girl's shoulder, which is like a great line, but it's speaking at once to like this violence, but then also in like this kind of seductive way. She immediately follows it up by saying, I don't mind, you have nice strong hands or something like that.
Right. Because like, there's this twisted like thrill of, and I don't think that this movie is so much guilty of that, but the only bit of hard-boiled fiction that I've read is The Postman Always Rings Twice by James M. Cain, who also wrote Double Indemnity. And that definitely, there's like a plot to murder this woman's husband, and then like there's a violent sexuality to it. It's really quite tawdry, the book, and there's like a thrill, a sexualized thrill of this man and woman who are having an affair getting away with murder. And then I think there's also sometimes a semi-sexual thrill at seeing the femme fatale get her comeuppance and seeing her, seeing the look of terror in her eyes. And I think that it's hard to get. I don't know that this film is really doing that in a really bad way, but there's certainly instances I've seen where even that is sexualized in a way that is sort of like, it's definitely degenerate.
Like it's again, it's hard to talk about this nowadays where this subject is like so fraught. But I definitely think that there's probably something to that. that, you know, there's an angst, I think, like a male angst at being not the one who's in control.
Right.
You know, maybe control isn't necessarily the right word. Maybe it's about being a leader, you know, being a decision maker, you know. But at the end of this film, Kathy says several times, you know, I'm running the show now. And he says that right back to her, you know, you're running the show now.
Right.
And so, like, it's...
but there's also the thrill of revenge. There's also the thrill of revenge. And, like, the hero has been in this, you know, this sexual relationship to one extent or another, sexual, you know, with a woman who then betrays him. And so I think that the bitterness is also, and I'm just, for the audience, I'm just trying to describe what's going on in these movies, and, you know, and not to even to say it's good or anything, but there's, and I'm also talking about a genre, and so it can take on more or less acceptable forms, you know, in different films. But I think that there's also very often a kind of a when you have been betrayed by a lover, then there is also almost a sexualized aspect to getting even and seeing the shoe on the other foot, and that also has this like sexual tinge to it. I don't want to like scandalize anybody by talking about this, but I'm just trying to, I don't know how it all fits together, but these are aspects that seem present in this genre to me, so I'm trying to just like bring them forth.
Yeah. Well, and I think that my theory is that that's why these films become so popular. I think that it's also why these films can sort of be transposed into different environments and different situations. But that I think that probably the relationship between men and women is like the beating heart of these films.
And it can also be a big part of what makes some of them, you know, very morally sleazy.
Yeah. And I haven't seen a ton of film noir. But based on what I have seen, it seems to be like that's the main hook. That's the main in.
Yeah. And you're not necessarily talking about specifically the tawdry element of it, but the psychological dynamic.
Yeah. And I think that given like social changes in the late 40s, when these films are coming out, you know, I think that that's probably what these films are speaking to.
Yeah. But there's also this moral conflict within the hero himself, which I think, and this morally compromised hero that I think is a whole other thing. You know.
Yeah, well, it's almost like the death throes of traditional, of like of traditional morality and of the family. You know, it's like it's like the breakdown being dramatized,
because so much of the corruption. It's like it's not just the hero. Sometimes the hero is genuinely a bad person. Sometimes he's just a person who has principles but has kind of an empty life. But always that he's surrounded by corruption. You know, and so this social corruption and this social lack of cohesion is really on display in noir as well. It's interesting to compare like the Western hero to the noir hero, because I said earlier the noir hero starts out a loser in the beginning of the story, and he ends the story as a loser, you know. And a big part of his loserdom is his like being alone, you know, and his being sort of having kind of an empty life. You know, that's also very true of the classic Western hero, you know, riding off into the sunset, right? And sometimes that has a tragic and sad element that he comes to serve society but can't fit into it. But it's much more really heroic than the noir hero. You know what I mean? It's less bitter and cynical. He's not really a loser. He's just a guy who doesn't fit in, Sometimes he's a loser, sometimes he's an outlaw, but the ethos of it is a little bit different, don't you think?
Yeah, it seems to me. An interesting film to compare this to is Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood, where like he's this it's a Western where Clint Eastwood has like left his gunslinging days, but then is sort of like the past comes back and pulls him back in. I only mention that because we're comparing Westerns and noir.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know.
I guess one of the big differences seems to be to me that the Western hero is at the service of an integrated society. I mean, what do we talk about when we talk about Stagecoach is this whole idea of community forming. Whereas in noir, it seems like we're seeing community disintegrating,
right?
And then and the noir hero just trying to seize onto something to stay afloat.
Right.
Whereas the Western hero seems to be someone who is an outsider and doesn't fit in. Sometimes he becomes a part of the community at the end. Sometimes he doesn't. But typically, he's riding off into the sunset, right? And but it's always at the service of this forming this community or protecting this nascent community. Whereas noir is. What set what the Western is set in the the mid 1800s or whatever maybe, and the noir is now in the early mid 20th century where everything's falling apart and there is no community in these these
well
cities.
It's interesting in Out of the Past that there is a community in Bridgeport, and that Robert Mitchum's character is there trying to make a living.
Yeah. A lot of the action that takes place in Bridgeport feels more like a Western. I mean, the confrontation by the river when Joe tracks Jeff down and, he's leaning over a cliff edge to snipe at him. That's a very Western kind of scenario.
Totally. Yeah. And the state trooper who is, kind of jealous of Jeff because of the attention that he's getting from Anne.
Well, there you got the man who shot Liberty Valance. I don't know if you ever saw that one. But
no.
There's a similar situation where there's two guys and there's the girl, and one of the guys is the more respectable, civilized guy. He's a lawyer played by Jimmy Stewart, and the other guy is this cowboy played by John Wayne. John Wayne's the one who actually takes care of the bad guys, but he doesn't get the girl in the end.
Yeah. Well. That's an interesting comparison too.
Yeah,
because like here, the state trooper is the one who gets the girl. There's a rejection of Jeff from the community from the beginning, right? So there's a sense already that he's just not welcome there.
Yeah,
and Anne is this this symbol of redemption for him, but part of her attraction to him is the mystery and is the danger, so she's not even like a totally one-dimensional person.
That's interesting.
And you also get the sense in this film of like the corruption spreading out to Bridgeport, like when the investigators from the city are there, the cops have come and they're in the noir outfits too. They're wearing the trench coats and the fedoras, and smoking the cigarettes. And it's like, okay, now it's coming to Bridgeport. Jeff has brought this here too. But I mentioned that trooper. I forget his name because he feels a little more like a Western character,
right?
From the beginning.
Yeah. What do you think about this deaf and dumb kid? We begin and end the movie with this deaf and dumb kid, and he is the protege of Jeff. And it's interesting that he's like the one. Well, he and in the end, he's the one person who stays loyal to Jeff. And he begins. It's interesting because Jeff is mentioned multiple times as being a listener. And that's also what this kid is, because he has to read people's lips and he can't speak. He speaks with sign language. So he's often observing silently and listening. And at the end, he basically, Anne asks him, was Jeff going to, because Jeff and this woman, femme fatale, are killed, and she asks, was he running off with her? And he pauses and then nods yes, and he's lying, but the lie is to give her closure so that she can go off without conflicted feelings with this state trooper guy. And then the last shot is him giving this little sort of nod to the sign of the gas station with Jeff Bailey's name on it. And this is the moment of glory of like heroism for Jeff Bailey. Now, obviously this is like a morally problematic device, for him to lie and tell her that this guy was, betraying her. But it is emotionally compelling ending. And I don't know. I just wanted to bring up this young man because it's an odd character to have in this movie. And what do you think is going on there? What do you think he's doing thematically?
Yeah, there are other instances where symbols are operating in this film. Like when Kathy and Jeff first go down to the beach and have their like first kiss, they're surrounded by netting, like fishnets. And it's like a pretty obvious signal that like he's getting trapped. I think that probably with this deaf and dumb character, there's something also some sort of symbolic nod, whether it's to what you've already described about Jeff's character as a listener, or if it's about
he's an outsider.
Yeah, being an outsider, or being somehow like stunted or cut off from being able to communicate. Or it's something about his past. Like we don't really know about this character, like how he knows Jeff, where he knows Jeff from, where he comes from, where he's going at the end. But this guy may be like one link with Jeff's past that's allowed to sort of continue, but it's mute. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's an awesome movie. It's got so much cool stuff going on. It's just like the definition of cool. I probably enjoy noir films even more than Westerns. And
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I'm probably more proud of them as like an American form. Even if they are like, problematic, which I mean, heck, like Western movies have their own problems too, but this is a little something else. And it's probably also because I'm just I got a little bit more of the postmodern like blood running through my veins. So like, I am responding to this like social decay and breakdown.
Well, the appeal of noir may be, similar to whatever the appeal of Marlon Brando and the appeal of, James Dean and all that stuff.
Right.
The punk, there's the punk element. It's just wearing a suit,
Right. That's cool. I'm looking forward to the other noir films that we're going to be watching. Is it one or two more?
The two that I had in mind were one of them. Well, they're interesting because neither of them is a crime film per se. They both involve crime, but they're not per se about crime in the same way that some of these quintessential noirs are. One of them is Sweet Smell of Success, which is about a crooked an evil gossip columnist, and the guy his little henchman who goes around digging up dirt for him to report on. And the other one is Sunset Boulevard, which is a movie about Hollywood and the lust for fame and
yeah, I want to watch that one.
That's one of my very favorite movies. Sweet Smell of Success is very much a classic, and super, super, super fun. It's got Tony Curtis and Burt Lancaster, and Burt Lancaster plays the arch villain. I describe it as it's like if there were a movie about Saruman and Wormtongue and their relationship, and where Wormtongue is the one you're rooting for against Saruman.
That's fun
to like get out from under Saruman. It's awesome. Cool. It's like a very specific dynamic. Well,
is there anything else that we wanted to say about this film?
I don't have anything in particular, but it is a pretty good introduction to the genre, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Of the noirs that I've watched, I feel like it's kind of like right down the middle, and there's a number of others that I love that maybe are not as typical, or that have like another good example that people should check out is Laura, which is about involves a person who's supposed to be dead. And somebody a man falling in love with a dead woman, just based on a painting.
Nice. Awesome.
And that's got great music as well. The theme became a jazz standard. I mean, if people want to check out Double Indemnity for another like really foundational work, another reason I decided not to discuss that is because Sunset Boulevard, it's also by the same director who did Double Indemnity, Billy Wilder.
The Big Sleep comes to mind. That's another
The Big Sleep,
classic.
The Big Heat. Yeah. There's a lot of big different things.
The Big Lebowski.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was fun. I feel like we talked about the film, but also kind of the genre in general, and introduced it in a not overly academic way. So
totally. And then hopefully we can get a little more academic once you've got this book.
Yeah, I hope that will enrich our discussion further on down the line. But our next film that we're going to discuss is back on the Vatican film list in the category of values. We'll be discussing Au revoir, les enfants. I forget when this film came out, sometime in the 80s. It's by French director Louis Malle, and it is a film set in German-occupied, Nazi-occupied France. Very interesting film. So we'll get to that in a couple weeks. And thanks everybody for listening. Please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Please comment. We'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I think I'm particularly interested to hear people's thoughts on noir as kind of a morally ambiguous genre. I mean, this film I think is fairly morally upright as noirs go. But I am interested to hear other Catholics' take on the genre as a whole, and maybe some of like the weird psychological things inside of us that it's tweaking that make us to make it so compelling. And if anybody wants to donate to help keep the podcast network going, please do go to catholicculture.org/donate/audio. I also want to mention for those who aren't familiar with our other podcasts, there's 2 new developments on Way of the Fathers with Mike Aquilina, which is a podcast about the Church Fathers. Mike has just begun his second season, where he's discussing the first 7 ecumenical councils that both are recognized as authoritative both by the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches. And then on Catholic Culture Audiobooks, James, you have just begun a multi-installment series of episodes, which will eventually be a complete recording of St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life. And you'll be doing that over the next several months, right? Yeah.
I think that we're going to probably front load the first couple parts of the book, and then take a little bit of a break, and then finish it off probably early next year.
Yeah. So check out Catholic Culture Audiobooks on Way of the Fathers. And if you want more arts stuff aside from film, you can always check out my other podcast, my interview podcast, the Catholic Culture Podcast, also on our YouTube channel, or you can subscribe to it wherever you find your podcasts. All right, everybody, God bless. Thanks for listening.